The rain hammered down like judgment from the heavens, turning the cracked asphalt of the desert town's outskirts into a slick, unforgiving mirror. It was just past midnight, in the shadow of the old mesa, where the wind howled through the skeletal remains of abandoned trailers, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and regret. In the dim glow of a single porch light, a tiny figure stumbled forward, a little girl no older than 8, her soaked dress clinging to her like a shroud, mud caking her bare feet. She clutched a ragged stuffed bear, its button eyes staring blankly as tears mixed with the downpour on her cheeks. Her knocks on the weathered wooden door echoed like desperate pleas, frail fists pounding against the barrier between her terror and whatever lay beyond. Inside, the house was a fortress of silence, broken only by the low rumble of a distant thunder that mirrored the storm in her wide, frightened eyes. No one answered at first, and she collapsed against the door, sobbing, her small body shaking with the weight of something far too heavy for her to carry alone. The door creaked open slowly, spilling a wedge of warm yellow light into the night. There stood Ethan Iron Harlan, the toughest biker this side of the state line, his broad frame filling the doorway like a sentinel carved from granite. At 45, Ethan was a legend among the Iron Promise crew, scarred from a lifetime of roads that twisted like the promises he'd buried deep. His face, weathered by sun and sorrow, bore the faint lines of a man who'd lost his own daughter to a fever 10 years back, a loss that still clawed at him in the quiet hours. He wore a faded black leather vest over a threadbare shirt, the patches of his club gleaming dully under the light. A roaring eagle, clutching a chain, symbol of unbreakable oaths. His greying beard was unkempt, and his eyes, steel blue and unyielding, narrowed as he took in the sight before him. "Kid, what the hell are you doing out here in this mess?" His voice was gravel, rough from years of shouting over engine roars, but there was no anger in it, only the wary caution of a man who'd seen too many shadows in the night. The girl looked up, her lower lip trembling, rain streaming down her face like rivers of fear. "Mr. Please, they took my brother. The bad men. They hurt him." Her words tumbled out in gasps, each one laced with the raw edge of panic. She pointed a shaking finger toward the darkened road, where the faint outline of tire tracks vanished into the storm. Ethan's gut twisted, a familiar ache, the echo of his own helplessness from a decade ago. He knelt down, ignoring the cold bite of the rain soaking through his jeans, and placed a calloused hand on her shoulder. "Slow down, little one. Start from the beginning. Who's they?" But even as he spoke, his mind raced, piecing together the whispers he'd heard at the last club meet, rumors of a local gang muscling into the territory, shaking down families for protection money that never protected anyone, corrupt badges turning blind eyes, leaving the vulnerable to fend for themselves in this godforsaken stretch of nowhere. "She was Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the relentless patter. Lily Ramirez, from the trailer park 2 miles down the highway. Her brother, 10-year-old Miguel, had been playing near the old junkyard when the men came. Rough types in low-slung cars, their laughter cruel as they dragged him away for talking back to the wrong crowd. Their mother was gone, taken by illness months ago, leaving the kids to scrape by on odd jobs and neighborly scraps. But tonight, the gang had crossed a line, leaving Lily to run through the storm, her bare feet bleeding from the sharp gravel until she reached the only light she could see, Ethan's isolated cabin, a relic from his days before the club became his only family. As she spoke, Ethan's jaw tightened, the old fire igniting in his chest. He'd sworn off personal crusades after his daughter's death, burying himself in the Brotherhood's code: ride hard, stay loyal, let the world spin its chaos. But this, a child's plea in the dead of night? It stirred something dormant, a promise he'd made long ago to protect the innocent, whispered over a grave under a similar stormy sky. Come inside, Lily, you're freezing. Ethan scooped her up gently, her small frame light as a feather against his chest, and carried her into the warmth of the cabin. The door shut behind them with a decisive thud, sealing out the storm, but not the brewing tempest within him. The interior was sparse. A worn leather couch by a crackling fireplace, walls lined with motorcycle memorabilia, and faded photos of the Iron Promise riders, brothers in arms, who'd pulled him from the abyss. He wrapped her in a blanket, the scent of wool and wood smoke enveloping her, and brewed a mug of hot cocoa from the battered kettle on the stove. As she sipped, her shivers easing, she described the men, tattoos snaking up their arms, a leader with a scar across his cheek, voices thick with threats. They said if I told, they'd come for me too. But Miguel, he's all I got. Ethan paced the creaky floorboards, the rain drumming a war rhythm on the tin roof. His mind flashed to the club, 50 strong, scattered across the valleys, bound by oaths forged in blood and chrome. He'd walked away from the fight after his loss, letting the younger wolves handle the patrols. But now, staring at Lily's haunted eyes, he felt the pull of that ancient vow, to stand for the voiceless, to honor the fallen by shielding those who remained. You did right coming here. Kid, no one's touching your brother on my watch. He pulled out his old flip phone, the screen cracked like his resolve, and dialed the first number in his contacts. The line crackled to life. Jax, it's Iron. We got a situation. Rally the crew, dawn ride, tell 'em it's personal. By the time the first grey light of pre-dawn crept through the cabin windows, Ethan's resolve had hardened like cooling steel. Lily slept fitfully on the couch, her bear tucked under her chin, while outside the engines began to gather, a low growl swelling into a thunderous chorus. 20 bikes at first, then more, headlights cutting through the fading rain like beacons of retribution. Ethan stepped onto the porch, the cool air sharp with the tang of wet earth and exhaust. His brothers arrived one by one. Jax, the wiry vice president with a laugh like lightning. Marcus, the quiet veteran whose scars told stories of wars both foreign and domestic. And the rest, a family forged not by blood, but by the unbreakable chains of loyalty. They formed a semicircle, engines idling, faces etched with questions, but eyes steady with trust. Iron, what's the play? Jax asked. Revving his Harley to cut the tension, Ethan glanced back at the cabin door, where Lily's small hand pressed against the glass, watching. A kid's in trouble. Brother snatched by some low-life gang thinking they own this town. Corrupt suits looking the other way. We ride for him, for her. No guns, no glory, just justice, the kind that sticks. Murmurs rippled through the group, but no one balked. This was the Iron Promise. Promises that outlasted the miles, lealdad that bent but never broke. As the sun breached the horizon, painting the mesa in hues of gold and crimson, the convoy roared to life. Ethan mounted his bike, the familiar vibration coursing through him like a second heartbeat. Lily waved from the porch, her fear tempered by a spark of hope. This ride wasn't just for Miguel. It was for every shadow Ethan had let slide, every promise he'd let fade. The dust rose in their wake, a veil of determination as they thundered toward the junkyard and whatever moral reckoning awaited. The road ahead twisted like the scars on Ethan's soul, but for the first time in years he felt the weight lift, replaced by the unyielding grip of purpose. Little did he know, this dawn would unravel secrets from his past, binding the club in a trial of fire that tested every oath they'd sworn. The convoy sliced through the morning mist like a blade through silk, engines snarling in unison as they crested the rise overlooking the junkyard. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over rusted hulks of forgotten vehicles, twisted metal skeletons piled high, their chrome edges glinting like broken promises under the relentless light. Ethan led the pack, his Harley rumbling beneath him, the vibrations sinking with the steady thump of his heart. The air was thick with the acrid bite of oil and decay, mingling with the faint, earthy whisper of dew evaporating from the sagebrush lining the road. Behind him, the Iron Promise riders formed an ironclad line. Jax on his flank, Marcus bringing up the rear, their leather vests creaking with each lean into the curve. No words passed between them now. The brotherhood spoke in the growl of throttles and the shared weight of purpose. As they neared the chain-link fence encircling the yard, Ethan signaled a halt with a raised fist, the engines cutting to a low idle that echoed like a held breath. The junkyard sprawled before them, a labyrinth of scrap and silence, broken only by the distant caw of a crow perched on a crumpled fender. Lily's words replayed in his mind. The low-slung cars, the scarred leader, the threats that hung like storm clouds over her fragile world. He'd seen places like this before, havens for those who preyed on the weak, shielded by the indifference of a town too weary to fight back. Ethan's gloved hands tightened on the grips, calluses rasping against leather as memories flickered. His daughter's small hand in his, slipping away in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and finality. That loss had forged him into iron, unbendable but hollow until now. Spread out, eyes sharp, Ethan murmured into the wind, his voice carrying just far enough. The riders dismounted in a fluid motion, boots crunching on gravel as they fanned toward the entrance. Jax flanked him, his wiry frame coiled like a spring, while Marcus scanned the perimeter with the quiet intensity of a man who'd stared down worse than shadows. They slipped through a gap in the fence, the metal cold and jagged against their sleeves, emerging into the maze. The air grew heavier here, laced with the metallic tang of rust and something sharper, fear, perhaps, or the residue of desperation. Deeper in, voices drifted on the breeze, low and mocking, punctuated by the clink of bottles. Ethan motioned the group to cover, crouching behind a stack of derelict tires that reeked of rubber and age. Through the gaps, he spotted them. 5 men lounging against a battered truck, their postures lazy but eyes darting like cornered animals. Tattoos curled up their necks, faded ink telling tales of petty empires built on intimidation. At the center stood the leader, Victor Kane. Ethan recognized him from old whispers in the club, a scar slicing his cheek like a poorly healed grudge. He was barking orders, his laugh a bark that cut through the stillness, while 2 others hauled crates from the truck's bed, their movements rough and hurried. And there, tied to a rusted pole amid the debris, was Miguel. The boy couldn't have been more than 10, his dark hair matted with dirt, clothes torn at the sleeves suggesting a struggle he'd never win alone. He sat with knees drawn up, head bowed, but his eyes, fierce, unyielding, lifted as the wind shifted, carrying the faint rumble of distant engines. No cries escaped him. Instead, a quiet defiance burned in his stare, the kind that came from knowing he was all his sister had left. Ethan's chest tightened, a vice of old grief and fresh resolve. This wasn't just a kid, it was a mirror to the innocence he'd failed to shield once. "Plan?" Jax whispered, his breath warm against Ethan's ear, the scent of tobacco and resolve clinging to him. "We talk first. No escalating unless they force it," Ethan replied, his tone steel wrapped in restraint. The Iron Promise wasn't about brawls. It was about oaths that held when the world crumbled. He stepped out from cover, hands visible and empty, the crunch of his boots announcing his presence like a challenge. The gang froze, hands inching toward pockets, but Victor's sneer twisted into recognition. "Iron Harlan. Didn't peg you for the hero type. Thought you rode solo after your tragedy." Victor's voice dripped venom, the scar on his cheek pulling taut as he straightened. The men shifted, forming a loose wall, but Ethan's gaze never wavered, locking onto the boy. "Let the kid go, Victor. This ain't your territory to bleed dry." Ethan's words hung heavy, laced with the moral weight of a man who'd buried too many regrets. The air thickened, the sun beating down now, turning the yard into a furnace of tension. Miguel's eyes widened, hope flickering like a spark in dry tinder. Victor chuckled, but it rang hollow, his fingers twitching near a hidden blade. Kid mouthed off, cost his ma's rent, figuratively speaking. You and your tin soldier's gonna pay up for him. The others murmured agreement, but Ethan saw the cracks. Uneasy glances toward the road, whispers of the club's growing shadow. Behind Ethan, the riders emerged one by one, a silent testament to loyalty. 20 strong now, more arriving by the minute, their presence a tide, eroding the gang's bravado. Jax's hand rested lightly on his handlebars, Marcus's stance a quiet warning. No weapons drawn, but the air hummed with the promise of unyielding justice. "We're not here for money," Ethan said, stepping closer, the gravel shifting underfoot. "We're here for the promise of this town. You touch the innocent, you answer to us. Walk away, Victor. Take your crew and your shadows elsewhere." The leader's face darkened, conflict warring in his eyes, greed against the dawning realization of the storm he'd stirred. Miguel strained against his bonds, the rope biting into his wrists, leaving faint marks of restraint. A distant siren wailed, faint but approaching, the corrupt threads of local authority weaving into the fray. Ethan had allies in the shadows too, old contacts who'd bent ears without breaking laws. But this moment teetered on a knife's edge, ethics clashing like thunderheads. Victor spat to the side, the glob landing in the dust with a soft hiss. "You think your code scares me? This town's rotten from the core. Badge boys get their cut, and we get ours." But his voice faltered as another wave of engines swelled outside the fence, the iron promise swelling to 30, headlights piercing the haze like accusatory fingers. The boy watched, breath held, as the standoff stretched, seconds ticking like a countdown to redemption or ruin. Ethan's mind raced, piecing the puzzle. Rumors of Victor's ties to a crooked sheriff, shakedowns funding a web of silence. To break it meant more than one rescue. It meant uprooting the decay. "Last chance," he said softly, the words carrying the weight of a vow renewed. "For the kid, for the promises we all bury." Tension coiled tighter, the junkyard holding its breath as Victor's hand finally moved, not to fight, but to signal his men. The first threads of unraveling began, but the true test loomed. Not in the yard, but in the secrets that bound Ethan to this fight, pulling his past into the light like a long-forgotten chain. Victor's eyes narrowed to slits, the scar on his cheek twitching like a live wire under the relentless sun. The junkyard baked in the midday heat, waves of shimmer rising from the scorched metal carcasses, carrying the bitter tang of overheated oil and scorched rubber. Dust motes danced in the air, stirred by the faint breeze that whispered through the twisted frames, while the distant hum of arriving engines grew into a symphony of resolve. 40 riders now, their silhouettes massing beyond the fence like guardians forged from shadow and steel. Ethan's stance remained unyielding, boots planted firm in the gravel, the leather of his vest creaking softly with each measured breath. He could feel the weight of his brother's eyes on him, a silent chain linking them all, unbreakable as the oaths they'd sworn under starlit skies and bloodied knuckles. The leader's hand hovered, fingers curling into a fist before unclenching, a gesture of reluctant surrender that tasted like defeat. "Fine," Victor growled, his voice a rasp, scraped raw by years of barked commands and swallowed pride. "Take the brat. But this ain't over, Iron. You stir this pot and it'll boil over on everyone, your pretty little club included." He jerked his head toward the 2 men, flanking Miguel, who moved with grudging slowness, their boots dragging through the debris as they untied the ropes. The cords fell away with a soft thud, revealing wrists chafed red but unbroken, marks of endurance rather than ruin. Miguel scrambled to his feet, legs wobbling from hours of strain, his dark eyes locking onto Ethan's with a mix of awe and exhaustion. No words yet, just a nod, small but fierce, echoing the quiet strength that had kept him silent through the ordeal. Ethan crossed the yard in 3 strides, the crunch of gravel underfoot punctuating the tension like footsteps in a tomb. He knelt before the boy, his massive frame folding with unexpected gentleness, the scent of sweat and earth rising between them. "You hurt bad, son?" he asked, voice low, gravel softened by the storm of emotions churning inside. Miguel shook his head, rubbing his arms, but his lower lip quivered, betraying the facade. They said Mama's debt was ours now. Said we'd pay or disappear." The words hung heavy, laced with the innocence of a child piecing together a world gone wrong. Ethan's jaw clenched, the old wound in his chest flaring, an echo of his daughter's final days, when bills piled like accusations and help came too late. From the perimeter, Jax approached, his wiry build cutting through the haze, eyes scanning Victor's crew for any twitch of betrayal. "Mount up, boys," he called softly to the others, who began to withdraw like a tide receding, engines coughing to life in a rolling thunder that vibrated through the ground. Marcus lingered, his quiet presence a bulwark, hand resting on the small of Miguel's back as he guided the boy toward the fence. The gang watched, postures deflating, their crates of ill-gotten goods left half unloaded in the truck bed, symbols of a crumbling facade. Victor spat again, but this time it landed short, evaporating in the dust, his bravado cracking under the club's unblinking gaze. As Ethan rose, lifting Miguel effortlessly onto his shoulder, the boy's weight a feather against his frame, the air split with the wail of sirens, sharp and insistent, slicing through the junkyard's stifling calm. Blue and red lights flashed in the distance, cresting the rise like harbingers of the very corruption Ethan had long suspected. Victor's lips curled into a smirk, fleeting but telling. "Told you, the law's got its leash on us all." He backed toward his truck, his men piling in with hurried shoves, tires spinning gravel into a choking cloud as they peeled away. The vehicle fishtailed onto the road, vanishing into the shimmer, leaving only the acrid scent of burnt rubber and unresolved threats. Ethan's mind raced, piecing the fragments. The sheriff's office, whispers of payoffs in smoke-filled diners, badges bought cheap in a town starved for justice. He'd turned a blind eye once, after his loss, retreating into the club's insulated world of rides and rituals. But now, with Miguel's small hand gripping his vest, the past clawed back, demanding reckoning. "Get him to the cabin," Ethan instructed Jax, passing the boy down like a sacred charge. "Lily's waiting. Keep eyes on the roads, those snakes might circle back." Jax nodded, his laugh absent now, replaced by the steely focus of brotherhood tested. The riders formed a protective phalanx around the boy, engines revving in a chorus of defiance as they escorted him away, dust trailing like a banner of loyalty. Alone in the yard's oppressive quiet, Ethan pulled out his phone, the cracked screen reflecting the sun's glare. He dialed a number from his shadowed contacts, an old informant, a nurse named Grace, who'd patched up more than wounds in her shifts at the local clinic. Her voice came through, warm but edged with caution, the faint clatter of medical charts in the background. "Iron. What's brewing?" He described the scene in clipped tones, the standoff, the boy's marks of restraint, the fleeing truck. "And the badges? They're coming for cleanup, not justice." Grace paused, the line humming with unspoken history. "I've seen it, Ethan. Kids like Miguel. They're not the first. There's a web, sheriffs in deep with Victor's crowd. But there's more. Your girl's fever 10 years back, hospital records got buried quick, same hands pulling strings." The revelation hit like a gut punch, the sun's heat suddenly suffocating. sweat beading on Ethan's brow as fragments aligned. His daughter's illness, dismissed as bad luck, but now shadowed by negligence, perhaps deliberate, tied to the same corrupt veins running through the town. A promise he'd made at her grave to shield the vulnerable had been eroded by his silence, his withdrawal. Rage simmered, not hot and blinding, but cold, forged in the fires of regret. He pocketed the phone, striding toward his bike, the metal frame hot under his palms, vibrating with latent power as he kick-started it to life. The engine's roar drowned the fading sirens, a declaration that some oaths demanded more than words. Riding back, the road blurred into a ribbon of asphalt flanked by sun-bleached scrub, the wind whipping his beard, carrying the faint, cleansing scent of pine from the distant hills. At the cabin, Lily burst from the door, her face alight with tear-streaked joy as Miguel dismounted, the siblings colliding in a tangle of limbs and whispers. The club encircled them, a living wall of leather and resolve. Jax clapping Ethan's shoulder with a nod that spoke volumes. "We ride together on this, brother, whatever's comin'." But as the group settled, sharing water from canteens and quiet stories under the porch's shade, Ethan's gaze drifted to the horizon, where storm clouds gathered anew. Victor's escape was no end. It was a spark to a larger blaze. The corruption ran deeper, touching his own buried grief, forcing a choice: ride away again, or fulfill the promise that had drawn a child to his door in the dead of night. The toughest biker in the territory felt the first crack in his iron facade, a tear tracing down his weathered cheek. Not from weakness, but from the raw power of redemption stirring awake. The real ride, he knew, was just beginning, pulling the iron promise into a moral maelstrom that would test every bond, every scar, every silent vow. The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the cabin's weathered porch, where the iron promise riders gathered like sentinels around a flickering fire pit. The air hummed with the low murmur of voices, laced with the smoky scent of burning mesquite and the faint, comforting aroma of reheated stew from the kitchen. Lily and Miguel sat close on a threadbare blanket, siblings entwined in a quiet vigil, their small hands clasped as if to ward off the world's encroaching chill. Ethan's gaze lingered on them, the boy's chafed wrists now wrapped in clean bandages from Grace's quick visit, faint reminders of the struggle that had brought this fragile peace. The club's presence enveloped the scene, a circle of leather-clad figures, boots scuffed from the morning's ride, faces etched with the unspoken bond that turned strangers into kin. Ethan leaned against the porch rail, the wood rough under his palms, still warm from the day's heat. His mind churned like the dust devils swirling in the distance, Grace's words replaying in loops, buried records, strings pulled by the same hands that now shielded Victor's ilk. 10 years ago, he'd buried his daughter under a sky much like this one, the ground soft from spring rain, her tiny coffin a weight that had anchored him to inaction ever since. He'd ridden away from questions, letting grief harden into isolation, convincing himself the club's code was enough, loyalty among brothers, oaths that didn't demand the impossible. But Lily's knock had shattered that facade. Her plea a key unlocking doors, he'd bolted shut. Jack sidled up, nursing a tin mug of coffee, its steam curling like ghosts in the fading light. That call from Grace. "It's got you twisted, Iron. Spill it. We're in this ride together." His voice was steady, the wiry vice president's eyes sharp beneath the brim of his faded cap, reading the storm in Ethan's silence. Marcus joined them, the veteran settling onto a crate with a creak, his quiet demeanor a counterpoint to the group's restless energy. Around the fire, the others listened, 20 strong now, with more en route from outlying chapters, their engines' echoes still resonating in the valleys. Ethan exhaled, the breath ragged, carrying the weight of confessions long overdue. My girl, Sarah. Fever took her quick. Or so they said. Hospital said it was bad luck, no fault. But Grace, she's seen the ledgers. Bills shuffled under the table, treatments delayed, while the suits pocketed what should have saved lives. Same web Victor's tangled in. Sheriff's office, clinic admins. They let the weak slip through for a cut of the pie. The words tasted like ash, each one dredging up the sterile hospital corridors. The beep of machines that had faded to silence. He'd promised Sarah at her bedside, whispered vows to protect others from such shadows, but grief had chained him, turning resolve to rust. The fire crackled, embers spitting into the twilight, mirroring the spark igniting in the group's eyes. Jax's fist clenched around his mug, knuckles whitening. Bastards, playing God with kids' lives. We end this. Murmurs rippled outward, a tide of righteous anger tempered by the club's ethos. No rash strikes, only justice that endured. Marcus nodded slowly, his scarred hands folding in thought. I've patrolled borders, seen corruption eat towns whole. But this hits home. We map it out, hit the roots quiet. Informants, not fists. Inside the cabin, Lily stirred, her voice piping through the screen door. Mr. Ethan, Miguel says. He heard them talking about a big meet tonight at the old mill by the river. Something with the sheriff. The boy nodded from his spot, eyes wide but steady, the ordeal forging a resilience beyond his years. Ethan's heart clenched, a child's testimony pure as desert rain pointing the way forward. He stepped inside, kneeling to their level, the floorboards groaning under his weight. You two are brave as any rider I know. Rest now, we've got the watch. As night cloaked the mesa, the cabin became a war room of sorts, lit by the soft glow of lanterns and the fire's dying embers. Maps unrolled on the table, hand-sketched routes from club runs, marked with whispers of shady dealings. The mill, a derelict structure on the river's bend, where deals were struck under cover of rushing water and isolation. Ethan traced the lines with a calloused finger, the paper crinkling like old oaths renewed. We ride at moonrise. Eyes only. No engagement unless they force it. Document everything, faces, plates, words. Grace'll funnel it to clean channels. Folks outside the rot who still believe in badges that serve. The riders geared up, the ritual familiar yet charged with deeper purpose. Vests adjusted, helmets clicked into place, the metallic tang of gun oil absent, replaced by the resolve of moral steel. Jax clapped shoulders, rallying with a grin that belied the stakes. For the kids, for the promises we carry. Marcus checked his bike's chain, the links gleaming like links in their chain of loyalty. Ethan mounted last, the Harley's engine purring to life beneath him, a vibration that synced with the pulse of redemption coursing through his veins. Lily and Miguel watched from the porch, bundled in blankets, their waves small beacons in the dark. The convoy slipped into the night, headlights dim to slits, weaving through scrubland, where coyotes yipped their nocturnal chorus. The river's murmur grew louder as they approached, the mill looming like a forgotten giant, its silhouette jagged against the starry sky. Moonlight silvered the water, turning it to liquid mercury, while the air cooled, carrying the damp scent of moss and secrets. They parked in the shadows of cottonwoods, dismounting silently, boots sinking into the soft riverbank mud. From their vantage, voices drifted, Victor's bark mingling with a smoother tone, the sheriff's drawl discussing arrangements that chilled the blood, more shakedowns, silenced complaints, the clinic's complicity in overlooked ills. Ethan's binoculars captured it all, the exchange of envelopes, nods of collusion, the web laid bare under the indifferent moon. No intervention yet. This was evidence, the kind that toppled empires without a single shot. But as Victor turned, his gaze sweeping the tree line, a flicker of suspicion crossed his scarred face. The standoff from the junkyard lingered, a grudge festering. Jax whispered, They're onto something. We pull back. Ethan's resolve hardened, the past's ghosts urging him forward. This ride wasn't vengeance, it was the fulfillment of a vow, pulling light into the darkest corners. A sudden rustle, branches snapping, shattered the hush. One of Victor's men broke from the group, stumbling toward their position, perhaps a scout or a fool's errand. Hearts pounded. The club froze, ethics clashing with instinct. Ethan signaled retreat, but the man spotted them, his shout echoing over the water. "Intruders! Iron's crew!" Chaos erupted, flashlights sweeping like accusatory beams, the sheriff's cruiser peeling out with a gravel spray. The riders mounted in a frenzy, engines roaring to life, the riverbank alive with the thunder of escape. They burst onto the highway, wind whipping through the night, the mill's lights fading behind. Adrenaline surged, but so did clarity, the evidence in their minds, phones snapping discreet photos, enough to ignite change. Back at the cabin, as dawn's first blush painted the horizon, Ethan dismounted, his face a mask of grim determination. Lily rushed out, Miguel trailing, their questions a chorus of hope. "We saw enough," he said, voice steady. "The truth's our weapon now." Yet in the quiet aftermath, as the club debriefed over coffee and resolve, a knock echoed, faint, insistent, from the cabin door. Grace stood there, face pale, clutching a faded file. "Ethan, it's worse. You're Sarah's case. It links back to them. They buried it to protect the sheriff's kin." The revelation crashed like a wave, tears welling unbidden in the toughest biker's eyes, not from defeat, but from the raw dawn of a promise reborn. The fight deepened, binding the iron promise in a legacy of honor that would echo far beyond the miles. If this chapter's stirring something in you, drop a like below. It helps these stories of quiet courage reach more hearts in the shadows. The cabin's lanterns flickered like hesitant stars against the encroaching dawn, casting elongated shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls, where faded club patches hung like banners of forgotten battles. The air inside hung heavy with the scent of strong coffee brewing on the stove and the faint, acrid trace of Grace's hurried drive, antiseptic from her clinic bag, mingling with the earthy musk of the mesa outside. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, the file clutched in Grace's trembling hands, a tangible ghost from a decade buried deep. His steel-blue eyes, usually unyielding as forged iron, softened with a vulnerability that cracked the air like thunder rolling in from the horizon. Lily and Miguel huddled on the couch, their small forms silhouetted by the fire's dying glow, watching with wide eyes that mirrored the weight of revelations too vast for their world. Grace stepped inside, her nurse's scrubs rumpled from the night's vigil, the door clicking shut behind her with a finality that sealed the group in a cocoon of truth. I pulled strings. Ethan, old favors from clerks who still have a conscience, Sarah's records, they weren't lost, they were scrubbed. The fever? It escalated because treatments were delayed, diverted funds, you see. The sheriff's brother ran the clinic back then, skimming for Victor's early operations. They let her slip to cover tracks. Her voice cracked on the last word, the lantern light catching the sheen of unshed tears in her eyes. Ethan took the file, his calloused fingers brushing hers, the paper crinkling like dry leaves underfoot. He flipped it open, scanning faded notes and redacted lines, each one a dagger twisting in the scar tissue of his grief. Sarah's name stared back, innocent script amid the cold bureaucracy, evoking the hospital's sterile hush. The way her small hand had gone limp in his. The room fell silent, broken only by the siblings' soft breathing and the distant call of a waking bird outside. Jax paced the floorboards, his boots thudding rhythmically, the wiry energy coiling tighter with each step. This changes the ride, Iron. It's not just shakedowns anymore, it's personal. They took from you what no man should lose. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his broad chest, his veteran's gaze steady, but shadowed by memories of his own lost comrades. The other riders shifted in their seats around the table, the circle of leather and resolve tightening like a noose around the injustice. Ethan's throat tightened, a knot of rage and sorrow he'd long suppressed. But as he looked to Lily and Miguel, children spared by chance what Sarah hadn't been, the fire reignited, not as blind fury, but as the steady burn of a promise demanding fulfillment. He closed the file with a deliberate snap, the sound echoing like a gavel in the quiet. We've got names now, connections that tie Victor to the sheriff, the clinic to the graves. No storming in blind. This ends with light on the dark, not more shadows. His voice, gravel rough from years of wind and whispers, carried the moral anchor of the iron promise. Justice not through vengeance, but through the unyielding truth of loyalty. Grace nodded, her face paling further in the dim light. I've got a contact in the State Bureau, clean off the books. But we need more proof. Tonight's chaos at the mill, your photos caught faces, but not enough to bury them. Miguel piped up from the couch, his voice small but clear, the ordeal etching a premature wisdom into his features. I remember the Scar Man's truck, plates with a snake emblem, and the sheriff. He laughed like it was a game. Ethan knelt before the boy, the floor creaking under his weight, placing a hand on Miguel's shoulder with the gentleness of a father long denied. You and your sister stay here, safe with Marcus's watch. This ride's for all of us, for Sarah, for the promises we carry like chains. Lily clutched her bear tighter, her eyes fierce with the spark of trust born from one stormy night. As the group mobilized, the cabin buzzed with purpose, maps refolded, phones charged with captured images, plans sketched in hurried notes. Jax clapped Ethan's back, the gesture a silent vow among brothers. We ride as one, end this rot, honor the lost. By mid-morning, the convoy reformed under a sky clearing to a vast, unblemished blue, the sun warming the chill from the air and baking the scent of sagebrush into the breeze. Ethan led once more, his Harley cutting the lead through winding roads flanked by sun-scorched hills, the engine's rumble a heartbeat syncing with the club's collective resolve. They veered toward the county line where Grace's contact, a retired investigator named Harlan, no relation but a name that felt like fate, waited at a nondescript diner off the highway. The building squatted like a relic, its neon sign buzzing faintly, the parking lot empty, save for a dusty sedan. Inside, the air was thick with the sizzle of bacon and the murmur of truckers at the counter, but Harlan sat in a corner booth, his lined face peering over a steaming mug, eyes sharp as a hawk's. They filed in quietly, leather creaking against vinyl seats, the diner's fluorescent hum underscoring the gravity. Ethan slid the file and phone across the table, the photos glowing on the screen. Victor's scarred profile mid-exchange, the sheriff's cruiser plates clear in the moonlight. Harlan scanned them, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm, the scent of greasy hash browns wafting from the kitchen. Solid work. This ties to a string of cases, missing funds, overlooked reports. But the sheriff's got pull. He'll bury it unless we go public. Quiet channels first. He glanced at Ethan, recognition flickering. Heard about your girl. Same pattern. You ride for her now? Ethan's nod was firm, the weight of the brotherhood behind him a palpable force in the cramped space. As they mapped the next move, anonymous tips to state oversight, rallying townfolk weary of the corruption, the diner's door jingled. A shadow falling across the booth. Victor's man, the one from the mill, stood there, eyes widening in betrayal's glare, before bolting back to a waiting truck. The chase ignited in an instant, engines roaring to life outside, the convoy surging after the fleeing vehicle down the sun-baked highway. Dust billowed in choking clouds, the air whipping with the tang of exhaust and desperation, tires humming over cracked asphalt as the gap narrowed. Ethan's mind raced ahead. This pursuit wasn't pursuit of flesh, but of the threads unraveling the web, forcing the shadows into the light. The truck veered onto a side road, gravel spraying like shrapnel, leading toward an abandoned quarry where echoes amplified every rev and shout. The riders flanked it, a coordinated press without aggression, Jack signaling from the side to box them in. Victor's man skidded to a halt amid the pitted earth, the quarry's walls rising like silent witnesses, the air still with the mineral bite of stone and isolation. He emerged, hands raised, face ashen, the fight draining as the club's circle closed. "They'll kill me for this," he stammered, voice breaking over the wind's low moan. "Sheriff's planning a big move, warehouse on the outskirts tonight, cleaning house, tying loose ends. Your name's on the list, Iron." The confession spilled like a dam breaking. Locations, names, the depth of the rot that had festered unchecked. Ethan listened, recording every word, the sun climbing higher and turning the quarry into a crucible of truth. No harm came to the man, only the offer of a way out, a ride to safety with Grace's network. As the informant mounted with Jax for escort, Ethan felt the pieces align. The promise to Sarah no longer a solitary grave, but a beacon guiding the iron promise toward the heart of the storm. The real confrontation loomed, not in dust and engines, but in the moral fire that would forge their legacy or break it. Back on the road, the convoy thundered toward the cabin, the horizon shimmering with heat and impending dusk. Lily and Miguel waited, their hope a fragile flame, but Ethan's resolve burned brighter, tears long dried into the steel of action. The toughest biker knew this ride would demand everything, the scars of the past, the loyalty of kin chosen, the honor that outlasted the miles. The sun sank into the horizon like a bloodied coin, painting the desert sky in strokes of crimson and bruised purple, as the Iron Promise convoy crested the final rise toward the cabin. Engines growled low, a symphony of restrained fury, the air thick with the cooling bite of twilight and the lingering dust of the quarry chase. Ethan's Harley led the pack, its chrome edges catching the dying light like veins of molten resolve, while the wind tugged at his beard, carrying whispers of pine and impending rain from the gathering clouds. Behind him, Jax rode close, the informant's borrowed bike trailing with a hesitant rumble, the man's confession still echoing in their minds. A warehouse on the town's ragged outskirts, where the rot would converge under cover of night to sever loose ends. Ethan's name on that list wasn't a surprise. It was the spark that ignited the final vow, pulling his past into the fray like a chain long rusted but unbreakable. At the cabin, lanterns bloomed like defiant stars against the encroaching dark, their warm glow spilling onto the porch, where Lily and Miguel waited. Shadows of worry etched on their young faces. Grace stood beside them, her scrubs exchanged for a simple jacket, arms folded as if bracing against the storm. The siblings rushed forward as the bikes idled to silence, Miguel's eyes lighting with relief at the sight of Jax dismounting safely. "You got him?" the boy asked, voice steady despite the tremor. His bandaged wrists a faint reminder of chains broken. Ethan swung off his ride, boots thudding into the gravel, and knelt to their level, the scent of exhaust clinging to his vest like a badge of the miles endured. "Not yet, son, but we're ending it tonight, for good." Lily's small hand found his, her grip fierce, a silent oath exchanged in the fading light. Inside, the war room pulsed with purpose, the table strewn with maps and scribbled notes under the lantern's steady hum. Marcus unrolled a fresh sketch of the warehouse, a hulking relic by the rail yard, its silos looming like forgotten sentinels, surrounded by chain link and the distant moan of freight trains. The air smelled of ink and determination, mingled with the stew simmering on the stove. A grounding ritual amid the tension. Jax recounted the informant's words, the sheriff, Victor, and a cadre of enablers gathering to torch evidence, eliminate witnesses. The club's interference had forced their hand. They're cornered, Iron, but desperate men bite hardest. Ethan's gaze drifted to the file on Sarah, its edges frayed like his old grief. The revelations binding this fight to her memory. We don't bite back. We shine the light. Record it all. Feed it to Harlan's channels. Let the truth ride ahead of us. Grace interjected, her voice a calm anchor, the faint scent of her clinic's lavender soap cutting the room's heavier notes. I've prepped the kids for a safe house with a family friend, out of town, no traces. You focus on the warehouse. I'll handle the handoff. Lily protested softly, but Ethan's gentle shake of his head silenced her, the weight of protection settling like a mantle. Marcus volunteered to escort them, his quiet nod sealing the plan, the veteran's presence a shield forged in harder fires. As the siblings hugged Ethan goodbye, Miguel whispered, "Make it right, like you did for us." His words, a child's echo of the promises that had drawn this unlikely family together. Moonrise found the convoy slipping through the back roads, headlights dimmed to ghosts, the night's chill seeping through leather as they approached the rail yard. The warehouse squatted in the gloom, its corrugated walls rattling faintly in the wind, illuminated by sporadic security lights that cast harsh pools of yellow on the cracked concrete. The river nearby murmured like a conspirator, its damp breath carrying the metallic tang of rust and water, while freight cars loomed in the distance, silent witnesses to the town's underbelly. Ethan signaled the split, half the riders to perimeter watch. Jax, leading a core group to infiltrate via the loading docks, cameras and recorders at the ready. No weapons, only the unyielding code of exposure. They moved like shadows, boots silent on the gravel, hearts pounding in rhythm with the distant train's approaching wail. Ethan peered through a rusted gap in the fence, the interior alive with hushed urgency. Victor pacing under bare bulbs, his scar a jagged line in the flickering light, while the sheriff, paunchy, badge glinting like false gold, oversaw stacks of files and crates, flames licking from a metal drum as papers curled into ash. Voices drifted out, low and venomous. Harlan's crew thinks they're heroes. Burn it all. Names, ledgers, the clinic ties, that old fever case, loose end tied. Ethan's blood ran cold, Sarah's ghost in every word, but he held steady, phone raised to capture the damning tableau. Jax flanked him, breath steady, the wiry vice's eyes gleaming with the thrill of justice unmasked. The infiltration deepened, slipping through a side door with a soft creak, the air inside thick with smoke and sweat, the drum's fire crackling like mocking laughter. They crouched behind pallets of forgotten cargo, the scent of charred paper stinging their eyes as Victor snarled orders to his men. 6 in total, faces hardened by complicity. The sheriff wiped his brow, envelope in hand, sealing another pact in the shadows. Ethan's finger steadied on record, the device's red light a tiny beacon, but a loose board groaned under Marcus's boot, shattering the hush. Flashlights swept, shouts erupted, irons rats, and chaos bloomed, shadows lunging in the haze. No fists flew at first, the club backed toward the exit, devices clutched like talismans, but Victor charged, blade glinting in the firelight, his roar a beast unchained. Ethan sidestepped, the knife whistling past, the air slicing with its passage. It's over, Victor. The truth's out. Your web's burning with those files. The leader faltered, eyes wild, as sirens wailed in the distance. Not local corruption this time, but state responders alerted by Harlan's preemptive call. The sheriff bolted for a side door, but Jax's shout halted him, the evidence playing on a dropped phone. Voices clear, faces undeniable. Victor's men hesitated. The tide turning as exterior lights flooded the yard, the iron promises perimeter riders materializing like avenging specters, engines idling in a wall of thunder. Victor lunged again, desperation etching his scar deeper, but Ethan caught his wrist, twisting with controlled force, the blade clattering to the concrete. For the kids you broke, for the promises you shattered. The man slumped. Fight draining like sand through fingers as badges, Clean ones from the state stormed in, cuffs clicking, the warehouse's shadows yielding to floodlights. The sheriff was led away, sputtering denials. Files salvaged from the flames, the web unraveling in real time. Ethan watched, chest heaving, the weight of a decade lifting as Grace's contact confirmed. Sarah's case reopened. Justice for the overlooked. Outside, under the stars breaking through clouds, the club regrouped, the night's chill yielding to dawn's first warmth. Lily and Miguel, safe and waiting via radio update, would hear the tale as victory. Ethan mounted his bike last, the engine's purr a balm, but as Jax clapped his shoulder, "We rode true, brother." Tears traced paths down the toughest biker's weathered cheeks, not from sorrow, but from the raw catharsis of redemption. A little girl's knock had mended the unbreakable, honoring Sarah through loyalty's quiet fire. The convoy rolled home, engines fading into the horizon, leaving a town forever changed by promises that outlasted the dark. Thank you for riding this journey with us. Stories like Ethan's remind us that honor endures. If these tales of chosen family and moral fire move you, hit subscribe and join the Iron Promise community for more chapters of courage in the shadows.